On to the next part of our discussion, which is the actual forgiveness application process and forms. And for that, I'm hoping Malcolm will walk us through sort of the application and its components. And unfortunately, it's not the easiest application for most borrowers to complete, although thankfully SBA and Treasury have heard that critique, and I think they've recently put out some guidance and some new forms that may be very helpful to some of the borrowers watching this video.
Yeah, for today's purposes, we're going to keep it really high level because we could easily, spend a couple of hours going through the loan forgiveness application, and we don't want to put you through that. It's extremely complicated. It's extremely time consuming. And if you pull up the loan forgiveness application itself, you'll see there's an application, there's a Schedule A that you have to work through, there's a Schedule A worksheet that you have to go through. Requires you to document your employees that you had during the covered period that you were spending down your loan proceeds. It requires you to determine whether or not certain employees were actually working as full-time employees, because again, that's going to play into whether or not your loan proceeds are going to be fully forgivable. So I think it's very important for borrowers who are anticipating applying for loan forgiveness to pull out the application, get familiar with it as quickly as possible, because you will soon see there's a lot of employment and payroll data you need to collect, and a lot of decisions you're going to have to make as you fill out the application. For example, if you have reduced your workforce, you're going to have to think about, does it make sense for me to bring people back so I can try and maximize the amount that might be forgivable with regard to my PPP loan?
Thank you, Malcolm. That's very helpful. In a bit of other further good news, in addition to the enactment of the PPPFA, SBA and Treasury did issue simplified or easy forms, which allow certain borrowers to effectively seek forgiveness using significantly less data and probably burden and time. This was largely in response to those concerns or critiques that I mentioned previously, which was that the current general base form was pretty complicated and required the collection and analysis of a lot of wage and payroll and employment data. So Malcolm, can you walk us through basically which borrowers might be able to use these new simplified easy forms?
Yep, sure thing. And I agree, Seth. I think this is a great development for borrowers, potentially is going to make everybody's lives a lot easier. The borrowers that are eligible to use the EZ form, first of all, if you're a self-employed individual or an independent contractor or a sole proprietor without employees, effectively you didn't claim that you were paying any employees when you applied for your loan, you should be able to use the EZ form. If you're an employer that didn't cut your employees' wages, if they made less than $100,000 by more than 25% during the covered period, and you didn't reduce the number of your employees or the average hours of your employees during the covered period, again, highly likely you're going to be able to use the EZ form. And then lastly, if you didn't reduce salary and wages and you were affected by the pandemic, so you weren't able to operate during the covered period during which you were using your loan proceeds, as you were back in February of this year, which I think is going to describe many, many borrowers out there, you should be able to use the EZ form as well. So it's a great development. Borrowers, that use the EZ form, they're not going to have to list out all their employees on their loan forgiveness application. They're not going to have to list out individual employee compensation. They're not going to have to figure out which of those employees were full-time employees. It should make borrowers' lives much, much easier.
And now we're going to focus on our Don't Forget section of the presentation. This is our final section, and it's going to be focused on things that you as a borrower should keep in mind as you move forward in completing your forgiveness loan applications. The first one, and it's really important, is that you talk to your lender early on in the process. Under the SBA and Treasury guidance, your lender can use its own materials for purposes of the loan forgiveness application process. They may ask for different information than what's on the SBA Treasury loan application itself, both as to the extent of information, the scope of information, the type of information that's requested. So to minimize the amount of burden, cost, and time you're going to have to spend completing your loan forgiveness application, talk to your lender first. It probably will save you some time. Malcolm, what's our second don't forget?
We talked a little bit earlier about if you got your loan before June 5th, you have the option of spending down your loan proceeds over either an 8-week period or a 24-week period. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of borrowers out there that are going to want to use that 24-week period. It gives you more time to spend your loan proceeds on payroll costs. That should increase the amounts that are potentially forgivable. But there are some businesses out there that have been planning based on that 8-week period after they got their loan. So you're going to have to work through the pros and cons of using either the 8-week period or the 24-week period.
Another don't forget is don't forget to consider whether you can use the simplified or the easy loan application. It's important to think about this because one, if you can, it'll save you a lot of time. On the other hand, if you try to use it and actually you aren't eligible, it's pretty likely your lender is going to decline to offer forgiveness on the amounts that you've requested. So think carefully, make sure you meet the eligibility criteria. As Malcolm mentioned, there are 3 sort of categories of borrowers that are able to use that simplified form. If you fit in one of those categories, congratulations, you've won. The process of seeking forgiveness on your loan proceeds should be significantly easier and faster. So for folks out there who think they may be eligible for use of those forms, definitely read the instructions and think about whether you can fit into that criteria.
Even if you're using the new EZ application, you want to be thinking about the employment, payroll, and business expense data that you're going to need to go through the loan forgiveness application. That information is going to be needed regardless of whether you're using the EZ form or the original loan forgiveness application form. If you're using the EZ form, you won't necessarily have to enter all this data on your application, but you're still going to need it. Some of the information has to actually be submitted to your lender with your application. Some of it you've got to retain in the event that SBA decides to audit you down the line to make sure you are using your loan proceeds correctly. So this is very important that you start thinking about this information and how you're going to collect it.
One other important don't forget is don't forget to think about the safe harbors and the exceptions that are available to you to help maximize your forgivable amount. As we mentioned earlier in this presentation, your forgivable amount is subject to reduction if you reduce your FTE headcount or your salary and hourly wages for your employees below certain thresholds. These safe harbors and exceptions are a very good and useful way to try to maximize your forgivable amount, but they're pretty detailed, and whether you fit within them will turn a lot on your own facts and circumstances. So work very carefully with your advisors, your accountant, maybe your PEO, to think through whether or not these safe harbors and exceptions are available to you to help maximize your forgivable amount.
As we talked about earlier, one of the great aspects of the Flexibility Act is that it expands the availability of that Social Security payroll tax deferral, even if you got your PPP loan amounts forgiven. So that is great news for borrowers. You want to be sure you're utilizing that new benefit to the fullest extent. So you definitely want to be talking to your PEO and or your payroll provider about how you can use that deferral program.
One really important don't forget is don't forget to keep all the information necessary to substantiate both your use of your loan proceeds in a proper manner, as well as the amounts for which you sought forgiveness. So after you've completed your loan forgiveness application and you've submitted it, and after your lender has approved your application and forgiven your amounts, you really need to keep all this information. Why? Because SBA and Treasury might very well show up on your doorstep in the next month, next several months, or perhaps next few years, and seek to audit you to make sure that you used your loan proceeds properly and that the amounts for which you sought forgiveness were actually improperly incurred. Now, for borrowers who received loans in excess of $2 million, and that includes borrowers and their affiliates taken together. So if you have parent co and subco or brother-sister cos, and in the aggregate, you received $2 million or more in loans, you will be audited. SBA and Treasury issued guidance saying we are going to audit all folks who received loans in excess of $2 million, and that's based on the disbursement date. So if you're in that category, if you're one of those borrowers who got in excess of $2 million, including your affiliates, you will be audited and you will need to have the information necessary to substantiate both proper use and proper submission of the forgivable amounts. So don't forget, keep your documents. It's important. And our last don't forget, but a really important don't forget, is don't forget to partner with your PEO. These are really challenging times, and I'm sure you're really focusing on a lot of important things with respect to your business. As it relates to your PPP loan application process, your PEO is there to help you. They have experts, they've got tax experts, they've got accountants, they've got data. And more importantly, they have your back. So as you have questions and as you move through the process, please don't hesitate to reach out to your PEO.
So thank you, Seth and Malcolm, for a great presentation on what's very complicated PPP loan application and loan forgiveness process. The most important thing I took away from that was at the very end when they said, call your PEO. Your PEO is going to help you through this. They're going to be a resource. They've got your back.